Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to our virtual summit/radio show. We're experimenting with formats and having some fun here. Your host, Eric Kavanaugh, with two data governance gurus on the show today, Sarang Bapat from Mitsubishi and our good friend, Michael Baraz, actually, another data governance guru, formerly of Walgreens and also Axis Capital some time ago. He's built some programs. We're going to get into the nuts and bolts of data governance. What is this stuff? Why does it matter? And of course, the radio show will follow. Can data be governed or only people? It's a good, interesting question to ponder a bit. But Sarang, without further ado, tell us all about data governance. And I love this concept you have, economies of scale, scope, and learning. With that, Sarang Bapat, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. So if you think about we getting started with setting up the data governance program, what kinds of things that normally practitioners do, whether you are a leader or a person who is trying to set this up in your organization, typically the way to think about that is you think about why you're going after a data governance program, and it usually starts with what are your business strategy drivers. And it varies depending upon where you are in the landscape. So it could be what we could call as offensive drivers, in the sense that you are trying to improve your analytics insights, or maybe everybody's trying to build their digital communities or digital transformation. You may be going after the better customer experience. Or it could be a very defensive rationale that you're going after, partly because of the heavily regulated industries, maybe financial services or healthcare or M&A. I mean, I have been part of many M&A activities in the financial services space. These are huge mergers, requires a lot of cataloging, knowing where the resources are and all that. So you could be doing that for that reason, or it could be efficiency purposes. So whatever the strategy or the reason, that is the first thing that you're trying to figure out why you're going after the data governance program. And once you're kind of clear on that, it kind of in line with that, starting to think about, to meet those drivers, what are the capabilities that you're going to put together as a foundational capabilities for governance. And in my experience, usually it kind of breaks down into pretty simple, basic things, such as first and foremost, finding and cataloging your data. If you go into a big organization, first thing you find is people don't know where everything is or where the data is. So literally finding and cataloging your data is the first step. And then understanding the context of your data. What does certain fields mean? Like when you say plant, for example, are we talking about a vegetable plant? Are we talking about a manufacturing plant? What plant are we talking about? So understanding the context of what does certain things mean, and it goes to understanding your technical metadata, business metadata, those types of things. And then data lineage. So where is data coming from? Where is data going? All of those basic things, but foundational. And then lastly, trusting your data with your data quality. So usually it starts with find it, understand it, and trust it, so that analytics consumers or business users will be able to use that with confidence. I mean, that's usually how it starts out, with why you are doing it, what capabilities you want to drive at. And then once you are doing that, you start to think about, now, how are we going to execute this program? And has different components of, people, process, and tech, obviously. So when you talk about your org model, we are talking about here two things. One is, how does your data governance team looks like? What would be that structure? As in, do you have like a director of data governance, and then you have your technical SMEs, and you have a data management operations team, or you have a subject matter experts by each pillar? Like you have an expert for metadata, you have expert for lineage, expert for data quality, and so on and so forth. And a second aspect of the org model is actually standing up the data stewardship. So figuring out who in the business is going to own these activities of executing on our data governance policies or principles and so on. So when we talk about the org model, it is internal to the data governance team, as well as how the operating model would work between data stewardship teams in the business and your central data governance team. And then obviously the logical next step is what kind of tools are you going to use? And Eric, I would think tooling is the whole episode in itself. There is so much going on in the data governance tooling space that
Right.
there could be, concepts like, do you want to go with the cloud or the on-prem solutions? Do you want an integrated tooling strategy, as in all of these metadata, data quality lineage with one vendor or multiple vendors? And there are reasons for doing that. I mean, depending upon your size and scale or types of ETLs you got, there is a valid reasons why you want to have different options. And also sequence in which you want to buy these tools as well, depending upon your funding. Do you want to go after data quality piece first and then purchase the catalog, or purchase catalog first? So depending upon what the situation is. So there is a lot of thinking that goes through all of these things to get this rolling. And then the right communication strategy. How are we communicating the progress of the program? Like, how is it going? Setting up the data governance council kind of at the top level, getting that support and all of that. And I have seen last 4 or 5 years, we have been starting to get better and better at standing these up upfront and get decent amount of support and some funding to get this going. I mean, it does, whatever the reason, it's usually organizations are good at starting it out. And then usually the idea kind of becomes, from that point on, you have some money and funding. Where do you start? How are you prioritizing? And if it's your defensive use case, you might go after a finance data set. If you're talking about the privacy theme, then you might go after the customer data set, or whatever the case may be. And then once you run through your metadata, data quality, lineage, all of the pillars through your use case, idea would be to advertise those wins, show what the value you added, and then you're kind of building your allies in the organization like that, and then rinse and repeat. I mean, that's ideally would be how you would get traction to the program on an ongoing basis. So this usually goes reasonably well to start with. And what I'm highlighting here, the box at the bottom, the advertised wins and the realization metrics or success stories, the challenge becomes sustenance of that becomes a problem. You normally have a success stories like 1 or 2 times that it starts out, but after that it kind of fizzles out and it doesn't get anywhere after that. So the idea of these wins, if you ask in the business, it's usually business is not able to articulate the benefits of our data governance platform or program, or we find that can't find like tangible examples of success stories quarter after quarter. Or people who are actually socializing the program would say something like, I don't have a framework that I can go talk to the business about in these things. So so that the realization metrics would be a little bit more consistent. So that's why we need some sort of a strategy or a value framework, if you think of it. And that's what I'm proposing here. So the idea of this value framework is kind of goes off of the concept called concept of economies. So you might have heard these terms if you're in the manufacturing sector, or if you've done your econ classes or the business. It's kind of 3 components to those economies. So first is economies of scale, which almost everybody has heard. And the main concept is that if you make something in volume, the per unit cost of manufacturing that thing goes down. I mean, it's kind of a manufacturing concept, pretty simple to understand. If you kind of listen to Shark Tank, I'm a big fan of Shark Tank and listen to it all the time. So right after the pitch, the first questions that sharks ask is, how much does it cost you to make this product? And that is the first question that is asked every single time. And the reason for that is, I mean, it's a pretty important question. It's, productivity, it's important that the margins are dependent on that, profitability, all of that. So economies of scale is a big component. The second one is economies of scope. And that's if you're making one product that reduces the cost of making the other product, that allows you to create literally like 2 services kind of at the cost of one product, if you think about it. So for example, in early 2000s, there was iPod introduced by Apple as the first small music instrument that everybody was carrying, kind of recordings, gazillions of songs in one place, right? And then 6, 7 years later, iPhone came along. iPhone already had the functionality of your iPod. So marginal cost of creating that functionality in iPhone was zero. I mean, it's pretty much enriched product, but the earlier component was already developed. So the related product iPhone that was created, there was no additional cost for it. So the economies of scale allows you to do that. You have two raw materials created or one product already created that enhances your ability to create another product at much lesser cost. That's kind of the concept. Um, and last one is economies of learning. And in here, it's more about you learn along the way about your product, the know-how and things like that in a rich fashion. So the cumulative product is getting better and better. And a very simple example I can give is Tide washing powder. Everybody knows it can't get as any simpler than that, right? It's a chemical composition of the powder and then the water in which it reacts to. Now, Tide has their R&D centers on 6 continents for a reason, because the quality of water varies in all 6 continents. So if you apply the same chemical composition to water alike, it doesn't work well. So they learn a lot about how these things mix each other and all of that. That enhances the whole product itself. So their cumulative learning allows them to build much better cumulative product. So that's the economies of learning concept. Now you might be wondering, why are we talking about these in the data management, data governance program? So let me give a little bit of a context on that. So if you think about economies of scale, in the context of data governance, what we are talking about here is more and more business units as you onboard on your data governance platforms, or more and more systems get cataloged. The amount of time you are needing to search something when you need it goes significantly down. So the cost of manufacturing something goes down in manufacturing. This is equivalent to that in the knowledge work, where your raw materials is the data that you need. And if amount of data or information you need used to take 3 weeks, that you are able to find in 3 hours, that's a significant amount of time reduction and cost reduction and productivity increase that enables you to kind of do your job much better and ultimately help you. So economies of scale, as you scale your data governance platform, is going to allow you to do that. So that's the tie-in between scale to scale economies in data governance. Also, there is a concept in economies of scale where people start to get more and more specialized, and they get so good at some certain things that it takes them much shorter amount of time to do things. So as you scale your data governance platforms and data stewards get much better at their jobs and understand that, I think remediation, ongoing data research, or keeping the data accurate, and all of those things that are vital to the organization kind of gets exponentially better. So these specialization concepts start to come into play as well as the economies of scale gets better for data governance.
Yeah, this is good stuff. And so what you're kind of talking about here is the ability to learn what someone is doing in a data stewardship role, for instance. And that's a very important role, because the steward is in between the technical people and the business people, right? So the steward is really the liaison who is trying to articulate to the technical people what the business wants and vice versa. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Eric, let me follow on with that point, because I like to break these up into 2 different stewards. I have a business data steward and a technical data steward.
All right.
And it's not just a single bridge, but you got, the 2 that kind of comprise that whole bridge across the entirety. So the technical people are more on the data cataloging side. The business steward are more about the policies, procedures, glossaries and, all the business facing stuff.
Good.
And there's actually two different kinds of data lineage that are featured in some of the tools. You've got a business data lineage, which really is at a very high level. And then you've got the technical lineage, which is truly the true path from source to however many intermediaries through them to the final target. And it shows, transformations, and it shows tools, and, it's got the technical details that, comprises the trip.
And it has different usage for the technology stewards. That lineage helps them do different things, and business lineage help the business stewards need, at a little bit higher level view that they are trying to see, get the big picture of that for regulators and others. So yes.
Yeah, and you've got two different audiences. One for the business lineage, and it's really more of a functional conversation. Whereas on the technical data lineage, you're really talking to developers, engineers, people are doing data products, that whole technical crew.
Right.
Okay, cool. Go ahead.
And so the next component, the economies of scope as it relates to data governance. So this is more talking about, Michael, the lineage thing that you just brought up. That is one of the core capability that regulators require for you to demonstrate that you do have lineage for all of your critical reports for financial services, for example. And it's a tedious activity, difficult to do one time. But that same lineage, once it is built out, it can be used many times over when you are doing your impact analysis. So before, without a lineage, if something is happening on the far left in the system, person who is the business analyst would generally know what happens one hop to the right. But beyond that, how that element is used across the supply chain, he would probably have no visibility into or idea of. Now, this lineage that kind of goes all the way to say element, net income was calculated on the far right, but 4 things were used to calculate that. Where it came from like the wholesale system, then it went into the data lake, then there was this transformation layer, and then it landed onto the report. And these 6 things kind of touched it. So if you try to change any of those fields, these all downstream things are going to be impacted. And without a lineage or an impact analysis report, it is more like who knows that information and trying to call them, reach out. Whereas this is a little bit more systematic way to capture that. So these economies of scope would allow you to do that. One lineage built here allowed you to create your impact analysis service many times over. So the cost of creating that impact analysis service was minimal because lineage already built majority of the components for that. So that's an idea of leveraging that economy of scope in data governance.
Yeah, and we see the same concept now being rolled out in these data product conversations, right? The idea is you want to reuse component parts. So you could even do that with data models, right? You have a basic data model and you customize it for a particular region or a particular department, but at least you're not starting from scratch every time. And that's a big benefit of collaboration and of having a program and an office, right?
Absolutely.
And what you're talking about when you talk about different data models, really is you're hoping to have different views of the same data model, right? Where you can, feature certain subject areas or, domains or whatever it is, the way you're organizing. And that's really critical. And then, you were talking about the scope and it brings to mind reusable components. It brings to mind the concept of standardizing all kinds of different things. So I maintain a catalog of metrics, and the metrics specify how it's calculated, what are the sources, what are the inputs effectively, right? What are the outputs, and what is, the process in between those inputs and outputs. Like if you think about the PMI, and they've got their input, process, output, right? You've got the input, you've got the formulas or algorithms or whatever method of calculation or whatever, and then you got the output. Someone looking to do that kind of a calculation should not be making that up on their own. They should basically come to the library of stuff, find what they're looking for, they can basically, if at all possible, use that in API, or at least they've got the logic there to reuse that same component.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so is there basically a catalog of products is what you would do, and that way when someone wants to do something new, they first check to see if someone else has already built something,
Right.
and
So,
then go with that, right?
Yeah, exactly. So last time we talked about the knowledge graph concept. So, you've got a metric which is going to be typically embedded in either dashboard or report or something. It doesn't usually stand on its own, right? And those all relate to the data from which they came, which relates to the glossary, so we understand what that means. And all these pieces and parts are connected in some way. And there's lines that run through them from virtually everything to everything else, including that data model you were just talking about.
Right. And same thing can be done with the APIs. I mean, the catalog of all the APIs that you got, like under the domain.
Exactly.
So you know what all APIs you have, who owns it, what it does, at what frequency it runs. So it's like a good visual of, because otherwise it gets lost in translation. People are like, it's used, we don't know who owns it or when it runs or what is it. So the catalog would absolutely be a great way to document that.
Yeah, sorry, that's a really interesting point. So, virtually everything gets cataloged, and now you're talking about the catalog of APIs. And again, it's pretty much the same process. What are the inputs? What are the outputs? What's the process in between? Where does it get the data, right? And then, who's got entitlements and that kind of stuff. But, this is all, again, part of this idea of a knowledge graph, which just connects everything to everything else. And, specifically with the API, you make me smile, because I was thinking about an RFP we were doing for a tool, and I wanted the tool to be able to automatically go, give it a URL, go find all the APIs, public API, public facing APIs, right? And they had no idea what I was talking about. It's like, guys, this is just another data integration tool, this thing called an API. It's no different than using Informatica, using, ab initio, your choice of tool, right? Talon, whatever. This is just a mechanism people get data in and out of our systems, right? So it's got to be cataloged. Those entry points are just where data comes into our organization. It may be an exit point where people are pulling data from our organization, but we have to look at those as really important endpoints so that we can understand, we can measure, because the other side of this is like, what's the volumetrics? Are people using this stuff? If we've got data that no one's using, we're not measuring the usage of data, well, then we're wasting a ton of money on managing a bunch of data that no one literally is using at all, period. So like, you gotta have metrics around data utilization. And that's just another aspect of the APIs, who's coming in, how many times, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And the last component is around the economies of learning. And this is kind of near and dear to my heart, because it's all about the people. I think the data stewards and the people part is so critical in execution of these data governance activities. So, it's more about, as we scale the programs and data stewards start to learn their work, we form what we call as the community of practice for these data stewards. So they learn more about by talking to each other on they did something better, or how did they bulk imported the metadata, or they were able to search something faster into the tool, and they learn from each other. And then as they get better, they would start to ask more questions of the data governance platform to make the product better. So for example, they might say something like, we already have data quality rules. We don't want to write those in your tool. Can data governance tool export the data quality results and embedded that into the governance dashboards? Or they might say, you now you as a part of your business metadata, you already tag the PII and sensitive data and all that. Can you put together a list of that and send that to the cyber team for our protection of that data, or something like that, which is on top of what our product is doing. So new requirements of the data governance platform would start to emerge when the learning of the data stewards kind of gets to that level, and economies of learning start to, get more and more into that to say you are starting to ask more mature questions of the data governance capabilities or the platform. Like you're trying to do more than what platform was set for initially, and now we have an ability to enhance that. So that's how these three pieces kind of fits into the data governance framework. And I have few ideas here, kind of, we are data governance people, so metrics are kind of a big part of what we do. So how do you measure economies of scale metrics? And this is something like number of roles who are using data governance platform. And it's not just the data stewards. It will start out like that. But let's say year one, it was 5 stewards, year two, 10 stewards, and so on and so forth. So you can show the progression of data steward growth, but also it's more like, are technical architects using it? Are BAs using it? Are other types of roles using this platform? Because it has usage is multiple user groups can use this, and investment kind of is very benefited, if multiple people actually leverage that platform and use these capabilities. It is meant for that. Also, number of systems onboarded, number of business units, obviously, number of data quality rules. I mean, that's a normal progression of scale, but these are some of the metrics ideas that I have here.
Yeah.
And couple of examples here of the scope was also like, in many instances, you go initially and we find out, because of the budget, I don't have the budget for the entire tool, like full-fledged data quality tool. But if I have something that allows me to do profiling, that might be sufficient for like 60% of your rules, actually. So you might be able to leverage your data profile as a prelude into your data quality journey, and it can be reused when you start to build your rules with maybe more robust platform or something like that. So there are multiple ways to think about how you can create economies of scope around here. So that was just another potential idea. And then here are some, scope economy examples of the metrics, like how many assets we actually have the data lineage, and then how many impact analysis toll gates we are using. So before, if we weren't using any, and now every impact data change management toll gate uses this capability, you are kind of starting to see that people are using this more and more, and this scope economy is working. It's not just used for lineage, but it's also used for your impact analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Or how many profiles are getting created and used, those types of things. And last one here was more on the economies of learning. And one of the measures there is how many enhancements ideas actually came out of this community of practice group. Because if that idea is increasing year over year, that tells me that the group is evolving more towards increasing economies of learning are happening, and platform is getting a little bit more mature.
Yeah, and this all speaks to data literacy, right? I mean, a data governance program fuels data literacy for the whole organization, right, Sarang?
Absolutely.
It's a focal point. Yep.
Yeah. This is really good stuff. And because you're keeping track of these metrics, then guess what? That's what the champion wants to have when he or she goes back to the board or back to their superiors, back to the C-suite. And so you can point out specifically what you're seeing. How many people, how many departments have we onboarded? What have been the results of that? What are the rules that we've broken down? And that's all going to help build out a much more robust audit trail for future issues, for lineage, for understanding, for a journey into the cloud, for example. I mean, once you've got a good understanding of the landscape, that's when you can start changing things. That's when you can start kind of reflecting on what's happening and make some positive developments to take you in a new direction, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, this is also feeding into your investment rationale in the further years, right? You want the investment and the money and the resources. This kind of feeds into what all we did with this program, with the scale, scope, and learning, and it coming down to how it helped. I think it ties directly into why we should ask for more money or investment and those kinds of things.
That's right. That's right. Well, this is fantastic. Folks, this has been the keynote of our virtual summit today. We have a radio show coming up next. I do see the studio in here, so stand by, folks. We'll get the radio show rolling in just one moment.